Well, good morning. It's not sermon time, so don't get excited. I've got a couple introductions I want to make to you. Two very good friends of mine are here, Brian and Karina Blackwell. Now, a lot of you know them. A lot of you know them as educators. Some of your kids and grandkids have been through their schools. They've both been career educators in Midlothian, elementary school principal, junior high principal. He's here because now Brian works with Mentors Care, who we have helped last year. And he wants to come say thank you. But I just want to give you a flair of who he is, because he's not just a principal in town, he's a good friend of mine. But I want to tell you one of the most amazing things about Brian, just so you'll know. A lot of days when I'd go work with kids at his school, I would get there early, and he'd always be out front greeting and saying hello to all the kids and opening doors. And I don't know how many kids there were there, maybe 1,000, something like that. 1,000 or kids or so. That guy knew every kid's name. I can't even introduce you to my own kids. Every kid that got out of the car, he knew their name. Half the time, he knew what class they were going to, and he turned around and tell me all about them. He's just a guy that has a heart for kids and a tremendous educator, just like his wife is. And he just wanted to come and say thank you to our church for the help. So, Brian.
But I hope you guys understand that this is just a wonderful church, and we are so thankful. When I started with Mentors Care a year ago, I just fell in love with it. I love working with kids, and after being a retired principal, working for Mentors Care gave me an opportunity to still minister to kids, to love kids, and still feel like I'm doing something that's worthwhile. I hope you appreciate your pastor. I love this man. He's a keynote speaker all across the country, and as an educator, when he spoke at our convocation probably 15, 20 years ago, it just resonated with me. So the more I got to know him, the better friend he became, and he's the kind of guy that I would go into a foxhole with any day of the week. He is a wonderful man, leader, pastor, and so Eric, just thank you for your service to this congregation. But I came today to say thank you on behalf of Mentors Care. Our core business is mentoring kids. And if you don't know what we do, we're in 14 high schools now. We got 5 new schools this year. We go in and we simply identify 50 to 60 kids who are hurting, and there are many more than that in any given high school. And we find them a mentor from their community. We go into the community and we recruit mentors, and we train those mentors, and those mentors go in for one class period a week to those high schools, and they're just there to be a friend and a role model for that. And we have seen amazing results that one adult can make, the difference they can make in a young person's life by coming in 1 hour a week for 26 weeks. This year, we had 9 schools this past year, and I'm proud to say that at our 9 schools, we had every single senior across 9 high schools graduate. And some of those kids considered walking. Sometimes seniors walk away. They're like, I'm done. We're like, well, you're 3 credits away. I'm sorry, I'm done. We had 70% of our kids improve their grades or the number of credits they earned, and we had 77% of our kids improve their attendance. So the proof is there that the program's working. But one of the things we do is, number one, most importantly, is mentoring. That relationship is huge. But a lot of our kids have food insecurity. They're not getting enough food, so one of the things we provide is 2 snacks a day for our kids. And so it's a great way to help take care of them, to serve them, but we have to get those snacks, and we depend on volunteers and donations to get those. To tell you the heart of this church, we reached out to a mega church, and I mean mega church, and if I said the name of that church to you, everybody in this room would probably know, oh, I've heard of that church. And I didn't come here to disparage them. They're huge, they're busy, they got a lot going on. But after a 1 hour drive to this church, we were just simply looking for mentors and help with snacks. And in a 1 hour meeting, we kept kind of emailing, and we never even got one response. And that's okay, because if that wasn't on their heart, we don't want anybody serving unless it's called by God. And I made one phone call to this man right here in 30 seconds, not even 30 seconds into the conversation, it was, oh, absolutely, we'll take care of it. We got snacks for that school this year. And did you guys ever have snacks for this school? We showed up twice, and each time we loaded up 2 truckloads. I mean truckloads. I was worried that my springs weren't going to hold the weight. And many of you, Miss Wadsworth was here the day we showed up to get those snacks, and she's trying to help load them up. I'm like, we got this. So the heart of this church is loving God and loving people, and that's what it's all about. So we just thank you so very much for your love, showing the love that you guys have shown for this community. It was overwhelming, and I just pray that God will continue to bless this church as you reach out to this community. So God bless you guys. Thank you for that. If you're interested in mentoring for this upcoming year, there are flyers on the missions table outside, and if you have any questions, I'll be here after service. I'll be happy to answer those. But thank you so much for your love for the high school kids of this town, and thank you for giving. God bless you guys.
Well, good morning again. We had a good day, and it's just going to get better, not because I'm talking, but here in a little while we got a couple baptisms this morning when I'm done, so that's exciting, makes it for a great day. We're going to continue today with a study. I've preached all the way through the Old Testament, one book at a time. Now I'm doing the New Testament. I've been going at a different angle, and I hope you've noticed that. I present these differently almost every time because I'm really wanting to wet your whistle to go read the Bible. I want you to get interested and think, man, I want to read about that. I want to see if that's right. And so we've been looking at a lot of different angles. Last week we did 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, and I told you 1st Thessalonians is, in all likelihood, the very first thing Paul wrote. The first epistle, not the first thing he wrote, but the first epistle. Today, I'm doing 1st and 2nd Timothy. I'm going to do two parts on this one, but today I'm beginning 1st and 2nd Timothy, and 2nd Timothy is almost certainly the last thing that Paul would have written in his ministry, the last epistle. So 1st Timothy, he probably writes somewhere when he's in his late 50s. 2nd Timothy, oddly enough, he's about my age. He's probably somewhere 62 to 64 years old, something like that. And quite honestly, he's tired. And he ought to be tired. He's had the heck beat out of him his whole career. I mean, he's been beaten with rods. He's been shipwrecked. He's been bit by snakes. He's had rocks thrown at him. He's been in the world's nastiest prisons that exist. And he's just tired. And so he's going to say in 2 Timothy, I fought the good fight. I've finished the faith. I've run the race. And now what's laid up for me is a crown of righteousness that the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on the last day. And not just me, but everybody that's looked forward to that day. And so Paul's just he's at the end of times. He's worn out, and he's ready to do something else. And you know what? A lot of us here, while we're not ready to call it quits yet, we understand that. You know, here in about 3 weeks, I'm going to go back to Cypress Fairbanks, and I'm going to do their staff development. Now, you got to understand, there's 12,000 teachers in Cypress Independent School District. And so that week, I'll be doing 5 days, and I'll have about 2,000 to 2,500 teachers every day. And that sounds really exciting. And I'm going to be honest, when I was a young man, that was the biggest adrenaline rush that ever happened. I was so fired up, and man, that keynote and that arena is full is so exciting. And then I think, man, I hope my breakouts are full. I don't even think about it anymore. Honestly don't. That's not because it's boring or anything like that. I'm just not where I was. Now I do that, but the reason I do it is because I hope that maybe there'll be a principal there that day that needs encouragement, or maybe a teacher will be inspired to continue their career, and very hopefully there'll be somebody there that will take what I say and give a kid hope. But the motivation is absolutely radically different than what it was. And if somebody honestly said to me tomorrow, you can't ever go do another staff development again, I wouldn't grieve. You just change your perspective, don't you? This last week I took our kids, Parker and Madeline and Campbell and I took a daddy trip. So we went down to Waco and we went to the mile-long lazy river. Have y'all seen that advertised? It takes about an hour to go around that thing. It's really fun, man. I mean, you get in an inner tube and you just go around. The water's really pretty and you go through the oak trees. You're out in the middle of nowhere. It's not like Hawaiian Falls. Don't be thinking all that stuff. This is out kind of rustic, and the water's clean, but you're going around. It's about a mile drifting around this thing, peaceful. I'm with my kids, and it's fun. Well, there's one part of this thing where they've got these slides, and they are big. You go up on like a 40, 50-foot platform, and there's 4 of them. You can choose your level. And you go down this slide, and the end of the slide curls back up. So it shoots you up into the air, and you land in a pool of water. And so that looked like a whole lot of fun. And so the kids they didn't tell me, see, they were nervous. They didn't want Dad to get hurt. Decrepit Daddy might get hurt. And so, man, I grew up doing all that stuff. And all it takes, I'm watching people bust when they come out of that slide. It just takes body control. And so we went up to the top, and Parker's going to go. We're on the big one, of course. And it's a climb up there. You got to climb up this ladder thing. And so we get to the top, and Parker goes, and he keeps sticking his feet sideways because he won't go straight. And he goes off and kind of goes in like he's sitting down. He does all right. And then Maddie goes, and she comes off that thing, and she just lands flat. Whack! I thought, that's going to leave a mark. And sure enough, she was kind of sore. And then Campbell said she's going to go, and she's going to do better than Maddie. She's going to learn to lean forward. So Campbell goes, and whack, splat. She doesn't do too good. And so now they didn't tell me, but they're down in that pool of water watching me thinking, Dad's going to kill himself. And they were so scared for my back and my messed up neck and all this stuff, and I'm just grinning. I went down that thing, up there, wham, straight in, toes pointed, didn't even make a splash, butter. Yeah, there you go. It was a 10. And Campbell said, you've done this before, haven't you? I said, yes, I have. And we did it one more time, and I really, really wanted to do a backflip when I came off that thing because I knew I could. But I was thinking to myself, if I do, and I miss it just a little bit, and I mess this neck up, I'm going to be lying to Melissa for a month while I sneak off to physical therapy, so I can't do that. So we did it again, and it went well. And then after that, they said, let's do it some more. I said, nah, I'm good. Now, 30 years ago, I'd have done that 40 times that day. I wasn't tired. I just didn't need to do it again. I did it. It was fun. It was a blast from the past, but nothing else I wanted to do. That, in a larger sense, was where Paul is. There's just not a whole lot more he needs to do. And so he writes 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. They're called the pastoral epistles. Pastoral brings to mind preachers. But folks, really what the pastorals are about is this is how you ought to treat people. It's 3 letters of saying treat people like this. Now, if you're a shepherd, good. If you're a female leader in the church, good. But everybody ought to treat each other this way. That's why it's called the pastoral epistles. Now, they're written to Timothy. Who's Timothy? Timothy is a young man that's got a Jewish mama and a pagan daddy. Now, we can relate to that, right? We see that all the time. You know, when you're young and you're in love, you think it's no big deal he didn't believe. Well, it's not a big deal when you're all in love, but after a while it gets to be a big deal, doesn't it? But anyway, she's there where a lot of our ladies have been, a lot of our men have been. Evidently his daddy's not ever going to be a believer, but mama stays. She's a strong Jewish lady. She's looking for that Messiah. They live in Lystra, and Paul comes preaching through there and meets his mama Eunice and his grandmama Lois, and thank God for grandmamas, right? Especially in this culture, how many kids have y'all seen raised by grandparents? Thank God for grandparents. And so Lois and Eunice and Timothy get converted and become Christians. Now, Timothy's evidently a little boy. Paul goes on his way, and then eventually he comes back, and he's so impressed with Timothy that he takes him with him. He says, I want to be my disciple. I want to take him along with me on my journeys because he's so impressed. Now, here's the commitment of Timothy. As they're going to go into a Jewish region, he's half Jewish. Jewish listeners are not going to listen to him if he's not circumcised. Now, how you know a man is circumcised, I don't know. You have to figure that one out. But anyway, he is so committed to the Lord that he's willing to do that so that he can have that impact with Paul as they go around and preach. He's a fellow that's got this strong commitment. And he travels with Paul, and he goes where Paul goes. And sometimes he's with Paul when Paul's in prison. Sometimes he ministers to Paul as Paul is in prison. And as we learn in the book of Hebrews, he also is going to go to prison in his ministry. In the book of Hebrews, it says Timothy got released from prison. Now, if history's correct, there's a time when Timothy, who stays the leader of the church in Ephesus, because that's where this is written, he comes back into Ephesus and he sees a pagan parade going on. And he loses his mind. He just flips out. He gets right in the middle of the parade and he says, you can't do this. This is ungodly. There's only one king, Jesus. And he's preaching in the middle of the parade, and the people get so angry at him that they take clubs and they beat him to death. And they leave him in the middle of the street. And the Christians come and claim his body, and as history says, he was buried on top of a hill outside of Ephesus. But here's the thing about Timothy. Timothy is a boy in a man's world. He's a young man in an older man's game. That's hard. It's not easy to be a first-year teacher, is it? It's not easy to be a first-year principal. Timothy's a young man in an older man's game. You see, when you're a young man, it's not enough to be right. What is confidence and assertiveness in an old man is taken as arrogance and cockiness as a young man. So Timothy has to deal with men that are shepherds and with older ladies, and he's dealing with widow women. And here he is, he's this young man, and he's got to learn the art of doing all that. How do you deal with people? And how do you deal with older people? Man, that's hard. I remember being a 24-year-old youth minister sitting in there with 70 and 80-year-old shepherds. I was afraid to talk. And being right wasn't enough. Paul says in 1 Timothy, and he says in 1 Corinthians, he says, I'm sending you Timothy, who I love, my son. See, here's the cool thing, and here's what Mentors Care is looking for. Timothy's not just Paul's mentee. He's his boy. He's got this relationship, and he loves him with all his heart. And that's what seals this for him. That's what makes great ministry. And as I told you, Timothy's in a place called Ephesus. Well, what's at Ephesus? Ephesus at that time was a city of about 500,000 people. It's no small place. 500,000 people live in Ephesus. It's not quite as important as it was before, but it's still important. It's the site of one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And it may be the most fantastic of the 7 wonders. It's got the Temple of Artemis, or you might call Artemis Diana. This temple used to sit right by the sea. Now the sea has moved, so it's not there anymore. But at that time, it was right by the sea. This temple is about a football field and a half long. It's about 75 yards wide. It has 137 stone pillars that are 60 feet tall. On top of these stone pillars are blocks of stone that weigh 24 tons. How you build that back then, I don't know. The entire building is made of polished marble. And inside is a statue of Artemis. It's at this place, the book of Acts tells us, that Paul incited a riot. Because Paul preached at this site, and he told them, you don't worship Artemis. There's only one God. That's Jesus Christ. And he caused a stir because you got these silversmiths out there at the temple that make little statues. You ever go visit a famous place and they want you to sell you a memento? Well, they sold memento, so you bought a little Artemis statue. Well, these guys go, man, if they listen to this fella, ain't nobody ever going to buy a statue from us. In fact, they're going to ruin the whole temple. Nobody will come visit ever because they know that Artemis isn't a god. And so Paul started a riot there. Now, why is Ephesus important? It's a port city, but it's not just a port city. It's a port city where people come from all over the world. So if this is a strategic spot for Christianity, if you can convert people in this city, you will send Christianity all over the world. And that's why Christians need to be thinking strategically. You know, we as a church need to be thinking right now. The demographics of Midlothian are changing real fast. Who's going to be the first church to adapt to that? Who's going to be the one that thinks strategically and puts ourselves in a spot where we can minister to all people as this becomes a much more eclectic city? But it's not going to be Paul, because here's what's happening in 1 and 2 Timothy. Paul is handing the baton. He's giving the torch to Timothy. He's trusting Timothy. Now listen, folks. He's trusting Timothy with what may be the most important or the most strategic church in the first century, and he's given it away. There is a point where you have to trust young people and say, it's now yours, it's your time to march, it's your time to go, and we will do absolutely nothing but encourage you. We will never discourage you. You may not do things our way, you may not think like us, but it's yours now, and you run. And so he hands that torch off, and Paul says what he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, or 2 Timothy 4, when he says, I'm being poured out like a drink offering. It's over for me. But he gives them a warning. Now, if you want to back up in the Bible, in Acts chapter 20, Paul leaves Ephesus. But before he leaves, he talks to the shepherds, and he says, fellas, I'm telling you, when I leave, there's ravenous wolves coming this way. But then he says something very significant. These wolves will come up from among you. And he ain't talking about the church. He's talking about the shepherds. The wolves will come up from among you, and you better get ready for it. Well, guess what? 1 and 2 Timothy, the wolves are there. Jesus said wolves come how? Sheep's clothing. The wolves are there, and they're in sheep's clothing. You know who they look like? Shepherds. Ooh. Bet you didn't know that. The wolves look like the leaders of the church. They're leading people astray. Now you know, when you read 1 Timothy, now you know why Paul gives qualifications for leaders. That's not arbitrary. He didn't just throw that out there. Paul is a spirit-filled older man. He doesn't need a qualification list to know who can be a leader. He knows them when he sees them. These two right here, sitting here being educators and principals all these years, if they interview a teacher, I guarantee you, y'all don't need a qualification list in front of you to interview a teacher, do you? Shoot, no. They don't need to look at all the stuff and all the rules and all the regulations and what he got to be and what not to be. They can talk to a teacher and go, that's a good one, that's not, don't hire that one. They got it. But a first-year principal, man, they got that checklist in front of them. They're nervous as a cat, man. They're going over every qualification. That's why Paul wrote qualifications for leaders to Timothy. He's a young man. He doesn't have the wisdom of Paul, and he needs a checklist. Folks, that's why we don't look at Timothy and go, there it is right there, boy. If you miss any of those qualifications, you can never be a leader. Well, folks, then there ain't never been anybody qualified. What he's doing is saying, this is the type of person that makes a leader. He's helping a young man. Well, what are these shepherds doing? Well, they're riling the women up, and I'll share this with you next time. They're getting women fired up, and remember, you're in the temple of Artemis. They already believe in a lot of power, and so they're telling them lies, and they're getting them to forcefully take positions. They're getting them involved in myths and genealogies and horoscopes and stuff like that. They're taking Jewish legalism and giving them a whole bunch of rules. They're teaching them stuff you can eat and stuff you can't eat that has nothing to do with the gospel. In fact, it negates it. They're bringing in greed. But here's the bottom line of what Paul's trying to say. Disunity is killing the church in Ephesus. Disunity is what kills churches, folks. That's what the wolf always brings to the church. He wants us to get at each other. Disunity is killing the church in Ephesus. That's where John's going to write in Revelation when he writes to the church in Ephesus and says, you left your first love. So I wish you hadn't, but you left your first love. You need to go back to where you were. You got good stuff about you, but you're not where you were. Go back to your first love. And so what Paul is saying in Timothy is this. The number one job of the church is to find unity under Jesus Christ. That's it. We are to find unity underneath Jesus. That's why it's such a crime sometimes that we have a different church on every single corner, and then unbelievers look at us and go, really? We need to find unity in Jesus. Okay, so 1 Timothy, here's a little bit of what Paul does. Now, I'm almost finished. 1 Timothy, Paul's going to give some warnings. He's going to point out some warnings about false teachers, and then he's going to do some teaching. He's going to do some teaching about what a male leader looks like, what a female leader looks like. He's going to talk about what the responsibilities of leaders look like. And then he's going to go to 2 Timothy, and he's going to talk about ministry. In 2 Timothy, he's going to give encouragement for ministry in chapter 1. In chapter 2, he's going to give examples of what ministry looks like. Chapter 3, he's going to give warnings or the dangers of ministry. And chapter 4 is going to be exhortations of ministry. Get involved. Chapter 4 is get involved, go do this. Next time when I get back into Timothy, here's what I'm going to do. Y'all kind of like those sermons when I actually talk like somebody. So next time, I'm going to be Paul and you're going to be Timothy. Now, whether I do that in costume is my business, but we'll find out. But next time, I'm going to be Paul and you're going to be Timothy. But I want to end with this. I want you to do something for me. want everybody to hold your hands up. Okay, when you watch a movie and somebody's doing this, what do they usually say? Sorry? I give up. I surrender. Don't shoot. I'm done. I give up, right? 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 8, Paul says, I desire that men everywhere pray, raising holy hands with no anger and no arguments. See, we're not a church that has typically raised hands, but the reason I had you do that illustration is this. You can't do that without surrendering. You can't do this and reclaim power. I surrender. And when I do this, I am vulnerable now to you. A great way to build a church is to surrender to God and be vulnerable to each other. God bless.